Good afternoon. My name is Jenna Mazzella. I'm an undergraduate at Stony Brook University in my junior year. I'm majoring in political science and philosophy, and today I'm happy to share with you my paper entitled On the Merging of Care Ethics and Virtue Ethics, Benefits, Difficulties, and the Proper Balance. Originally, when I set out to write this paper, the topic is going to be care as a virtue. However, through researching the topic, I've come to the conclusion that care ethics and virtue ethics work best in conjunction with one another, but not subsumed under a single ethic. Through my paper, I explore the benefits that each system has to offer the other, the difficulties that they may encounter, and the proper balance that can be struck between them to minimize these difficulties and accentuate the benefits. I begin my paper with an exploration of the benefits that virtue ethics can give to care ethics. However, I begin with a disclaimer that care ethics is a relatively young ethic, and as a result, it is an extremely varied form of ethics. There are many different systems, many different definitions of care, and so as a result, I can't give you a standardized idea of how virtue can assist all care ethics, as there are so many. However, I have selected 4 of the most prevalent criticisms of care ethics and shown how virtue ethics can help remedy those criticisms. The first criticism I address of care in my paper is the problem of the broadness of the concept of care. Many care ethicists have attempted to give working definitions of care and have applied them as such to their own theories. However, I've found that these definitions have encountered serious issues. Normally, it comes down to the problem of range. Either the definition is too broad to substantiate the base of a normative theory of ethics, or it is too narrow, and care ethics can only be applied to the private sphere under that definition. It's important that care ethics is able to be applied to society as a whole and not simply to the private sphere. So how does the application of virtue ethics to care ethics solve this issue? Well, by allowing care to stay as a broad definition and applying virtue ethics can give the normative base that care ethics lacks with the broad definition. This broad definition of care would allow care to be applied throughout society and give it freedom to be applied as appropriate. This next criticism of care concerns the role of partiality inherent in the concept of care. Critics of an ethic of care say that being partial and having biases is not ethical at all, and therefore invalidates care ethics. However, there are 2 important responses to this criticism. The first of which being that it reflects reality. People, as their nature, will always be partial to the people they care about. Parents will always give their kid preferential treatment over others. They want to see them do better. They care about them. To ask anything else of humans in an ethical system is to deny human nature and to ask too much. The second response offered by care ethicists is that partiality is actually a very important part of what care ethics considers to be morality. However, this response and the previous one are unlikely to persuade anyone who criticizes care ethics for this reason. This is where virtue ethics can help out. Raja Halani articulates this well in his article, Care Ethics and Virtue Ethics. He says, virtue ethics includes, among others, the virtues of practical wisdom, of justice, and on my proposal care. Because of this, it has an in-principle way of distinguishing between justified and unjustified partiality, and of distinguishing between justified and unjustified claims of strangers on the agent. So what does that mean for care ethics? It means that the interplay between care and virtue ethics, as articulated in that statement, gives the caring agent the ability to identify when partiality is acceptable and when it isn't. Thus it retains the key role of partiality in care, but avoids instances when partiality may be morally objectionable. Furthermore, it is fathomable to think that a society in which virtue and care are working together, while partiality is to be praised, it still is not to be praised to be cold, indifferent, or rude to strangers, simply because they are strangers. Being kind to others who you are not partial to could be yet another virtue that is exalted in the society. Thus, caring needs to be applied appropriately. Another criticism of care ethics is that acts of care are spontaneous and thoughtless, since they don't arise from internal application and deliberation of principles. However, they aren't necessarily thoughtless simply because they are spontaneous. When acting from care, a carer uses the knowledge of the one they're caring for to determine the appropriate action. While this may seem to put care ethics at odds with virtue ethics, which seems to arise only from the deliberation of principle, that's not necessarily true. Aristotelian virtue ethics does map out the requirements for a virtuous act, consisting mainly in performing the right act for a particular time and in knowing that you're doing the right thing at the time that you're doing it. This is often seen as deliberation. However, I don't necessarily agree with that statement. Aristotelian virtue ethics also points out the importance of habit in being a virtuous person. You have to consistently do the right thing at the right time to be a virtuous person, and therefore acts of virtue become ingrained into your habit. This works well with care ethics. By doing a caring act consistently and appropriately, it becomes the force of habit and can still be a spontaneous act. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily conflict with the idea that virtue ethics arises from deliberation of principle, since it doesn't always do so. Both of them can be the result of habit, appropriately used at the appropriate time. A last critique of care ethics that can be resolved via the application of virtue ethics is the perceived possibility of a person who cares for another person being taken advantage of by that person. As an ethic that is not mediated by principles outside of care, there is a chance that a person could care for another who is in fact not a caring or ethical person at all. By advancing the goals of this other, a caring person could in fact be acting in a morally objectionable way, even though they are following the guide of care by caring for that other. This problem could most likely be solved within an ethic of care without an outside application. However, I do feel that the application of virtue ethics here does assist in this problem quite well. By advocating for the virtue of appropriate care, as articulated by Margaret McLaurin, as well as the virtue of wisdom, individuals could distinguish between those who are morally deserving of care, or at least the type of care in which an individual helps another individual by achieving their goals, and those who are not deserving of that care. Through the cultivation of virtues such as appropriate trustworthiness and appropriate trustingness, along with the virtues of selective refusal to trust and discriminating discouragement of trust, a carer can be protected from being taken advantage of through their care with these virtues that they cultivate alongside an ethic of care. It was these 4 criticisms I chose to tackle in my paper to show how virtue ethics can enhance care ethics. Again, just to summarize, these 4 criticisms were the problem of the broadness of the concept of care, the inherent partiality seen as a part of care, the spontaneity seen as thoughtlessness within care, and the idea that a person who cares for another can be taken advantage of to morally objectionable ends. Often when talking about the combination of virtue and care ethics, philosophers focus on the idea that care ethics needs to be enhanced by virtue ethics. Often neglected, though, is the way that care ethics can enhance virtue ethics as well. Virtue ethics, being much older than care ethics, is not as vulnerable to the type of criticism that care ethics is vulnerable to. However, that is not to say that care ethics has nothing to add to virtue ethics, because virtue ethics does in fact lack in several areas. In these areas, care ethics can assist. One area that I found virtue ethics to be lacking is in the area of the development of the moral agents. For example, care puts focus on the work done by caring parents to raise children, whereas virtue tends to focus on the adult individuals being morally virtuous and independent. However, it doesn't consider how they became these virtuous individuals. Annette Baer wisely says on this subject, "A decent morality will not depend for its stability on forces to which it gives no moral recognition." Care allows virtue ethics to put more focus on these cares that allow people to become individual, moral, virtuous agents. Instead of taking it for granted, care ethics would allow virtue ethics to put special focus on care in schools, parents, home, and society at large, these forces which produce moral agents in the society that carry on the virtuous society. Another area that care stands to enhance virtue ethics is in the realm of interpersonal relations. Virtue ethics often puts a heavy focus on the individual moral agent and what they do to be a virtuous individual. However, they belittle or ignore entirely the relationship between different individual moral agents. Even in Aristotelian virtue ethics, which puts a huge emphasis on the virtue of friendship, placing it as one of the highest virtues there can be, there is still an inherent focus on the individual moral agent as achieving individual moral aims, the virtue of friendship for oneself. However, care ethics puts a different focus on interpersonal relations. As opposed to thinking of the moral agent solely as the moral agent, care ethics puts the whole focus on the interpersonal relationships. I often think of the flourishing life that is set as the goal in virtue ethics as a type of egoism, because you're always trying to achieve these virtues to achieve the flourishing life for oneself in the end. Virtue ethics needs to have a stronger focus on interpersonal relationships in order to be a more complete system of ethics. The application of care ethics to virtue ethics would allow proper focus to be put both on the individual and on the interpersonal relationships between individuals. While this may show a little bit of tension between the two systems of ethics, one being focused solely on the individual, the other being focused largely on interpersonal relationships, I think that these two fit well together. Like two halves of a whole, they'd allow everyone to be in focus. If the proper balance were to be struck between virtue ethics and care ethics, virtue ethics stands to be enhanced by a deeper understanding of interpersonal relationships outside of the individual, as well as by giving an individual the ability to understand more about a particular situation in order to better take the proper virtuous action. Furthermore, individual agents would be able to take a true joy in caring relationships in and of themselves, enjoying them without viewing them mainly as a way to achieve their own personal flourishing. As seen in this last point, there are points where virtue ethics and care ethics can be in conflict with each other. Oftentimes, I feel that this conflict is the result of trying to subsume care as a virtue ethic. Alan Thomas formulates his theory of a virtue ethic of care. He puts the care ethics concept of dependence into a virtue called altruism. He says that the focus on the especially vulnerable is not what's valuable in care ethics, but rather the reminder that we can all be vulnerable is valuable, and thus he relates it to altruism. The idea that dependency is only a facet of altruism would not sit well with many care ethicists. It doesn't encompass the many requirements of a caregiver in the relationship of severe dependency, such as responding to the needs of a dependent other without being influenced by one's own interest in the exchange. It's an extremely complex relationship, and it demands an extraordinary amount of labor from a caregiver, and this labor stands to be minimized if care ethics were to be incorporated into virtue ethics and placed simply under the virtue of altruism. This could minimize the perceived value of the virtues of those people who take part in caregiving. This is an important difficulty to be acknowledged for care and virtue ethics. If the labor of care is minimized in any way by the combination with virtue ethics, care ethics is not better for the combination, no matter how the system is enhanced in other ways. Another difficulty in the union between care ethics and virtue ethics is the problem that virtue ethics has never in the past seen caregivers as an important part in society. They view individuals who are virtuous and morally independent as more of a product of luck than anything else, and there's a chance that the combination of care ethics with virtue ethics would not be able to change this perception. If that's the case, then it's likely that women and other caregivers in society who have been largely undervalued will remain undervalued by the combination of care and virtue ethics. If that's the case, this concession is too large to allow care ethics and virtue ethics to be combined into a singular ethic. These and other difficulties that are seen in the combination of virtue ethics and care ethics generally arise from the concern that care will be overshadowed or belittled by the powerful virtue ethic. This is heightened if care is meant to be incorporated into a system of virtue ethics and not put in a particularly exalted spot. I feel that the true harmony between care ethics and virtue ethics is found in the manner that they are combined, not simply that they are combined. In an ideal world, I think that these two systems of ethics could function side by side, but still be primarily independent systems of ethics. This would result, I feel, in a society that is both virtuous but has a special recognition and awareness of care. Care could help the society function in gray areas where application of virtue is not so clear, whereas the virtue ethics would give the people of a society the standard ethical procedure to go through life day by day. In my paper, I show that this relation is best explained or shown in the Heinz dilemma, in which Heinz's wife is going to die unless she gets the medication she needs, but the medication is too expensive. The question is whether or not Heinz should steal the medication. Virtue ethics, which would explain that stealing is wrong, would show Heinz not to steal, even though his wife needs it. Care ethics, on the other hand, would recognize that the value of the life is more than the value of medication, and therefore Heinz should steal it. This shows how care ethics would help navigate the sticky moral areas that virtue can't help in such a cut and dry manner. That is just one of the reasons I advocate to keep these two separate, as opposed to combining them into a virtue ethic with an overarching view on care. Another reason is that both of these systems have many fine points that are particular to those systems in and of themselves. By combining them, they would cause tension or belittle those aspects entirely. By combining these two, but keeping them distinct in the society, you allow for an individual agent, a moral agent, to use their appropriate judgment at a given time to choose which path is best, whether it be a path shown from virtue ethics or a path shown from care ethics. This gives a moral agent more freedom in using the virtue of appropriate judgment. A side note on the idea of appropriate judgment. This seems to give virtue ethics an exalted place by allowing the moral agent to use it to determine what moral path to take. However, it's been argued that using any system of ethics at all is the result of caring, especially in these two instances, which focus largely on interpersonal relationships and how an individual agent treats another. This is only to say that neither virtue ethics nor care ethics would be given any exalted place in society, even though they both have important, albeit separate roles in the society. The last benefit I list in this union is what I refer to as the open marriage benefit, as articulated by Maureen Sandersoft. As explained earlier, the flexibility to go between virtue ethics and care ethics is one of the benefits in their union, being able to apply one as appropriate. Even better than this is the flexibility to go outside both of these ethics to address a third ethic that is more applicable at the time. The ethic I explore in my paper is a feminist ethic. While care ethics is often thought to be a feminist ethic in and of itself, it could also be argued that care ethics is a feminine ethic that only perpetuates stereotypes of women that have been in existence for hundreds of years. Utilizing a feminist ethic in addition to care ethics and virtue ethics can achieve two important aims. First of all, it could start to disassociate care from women, which is a stereotype that has been around for a long time and that should not necessarily be there. Another aim that it could achieve is that it could encourage care ethics and virtue ethics to more aggressively pursue the ideals of feminism, equality and freedom in the public sphere in a way that it hasn't been before. In addition to working with feminist ethics, the flexibility of this marriage could allow care and virtue ethics to work with any system that's applicable at the time, such as utilitarianism or justice theory, anything that would help enhance the system at the time, being guided through virtue and care in conjunction with one another. This type of open system would give a society and individual agents the tools to respond to any sort of ethical dilemma they may encounter. So as I've shown, care ethics and virtue theory fit well into one another. Many of the shortcomings of care are resolved through the application of virtue ethics, whereas many of the oversights inherent in virtue ethics are recognized by the application of care ethics. I feel that the open marriage benefit is one of the best benefits that this union will create. I think that the addition of feminist ethics in particular enhances the conjoined ethics of care and virtue by extending their areas of interest to put a special focus on equality and oppression. While there's still some areas that may be in conflict with these two systems, the usage of appropriate judgment will allow an individual agent to sort them out and apply the proper ethics as necessary. Thank you for watching this presentation of my paper, and I hope that I can answer any questions you may have about it.